Lord of the Mysteries Fire of Destruction Chapter 426 to 430. While Serena was dealing with her excess of spirituality, elsewhere. Closing the flame that represented Serena, Adrian sighed as he scratched his forehead. Maybe I have to speed up Jerry's promotion a little. While I can deal with the problems on her path and avoid the mental problems that come with them, I can't do anything about the problems she already had. It was as clear as day that the woman had several mental problems. The clearest for him was undoubtedly her contempt for her own life, something that, although many people joked about, he doubted that Serena was lying. Honestly, this was something he was seeing coming. With the life the woman had led, it was normal that she had problems that had not only never been treated, much less diagnosed. Even if I can avoid the madness brought on by the potion, it seems that all Beyonders on the Hanged Man pathway are destined to have the odd screw loose. Mumbling a little, the redhead scratched his neck with a sigh. In the coming weeks, he will have to start collecting the ingredients for Jerry's telepathist potion and the listener and shadow skeptic potion for Serena. The first was obvious why. The faster Jerry reached Sequence 7 psychiatrist to deal with Serena's problems, the better. Not only would the little girl have a perfect opportunity to act, but Serena's condition would improve enormously. The older woman issue was a bit more complicated and dangerous. With Serena, the faster she progressed from listener to shadow ascetic, the better. Once someone became a listener, they could directly hear the whispers of secret entities. Thus, they frequently encountered information from powerful, distorted, and unique entities. This was a passive ability that they could not control. Only by advancing to shadow ascetic could they turn it off. This meant that while they were in Sequence 8, they would be constantly assailed with murmurs from hidden existences. So if they didn't advance soon, it was inevitable they would die in 5 years. Adrian wasn't worried about this, but in part, that peculiarity was just what he wanted. Although Secret Supplicant would help Serena learn extremely quickly. It would be in Listener where she would really shine, and everything would accelerate. With his mantle of the Scarlet Monarch, the potion would undoubtedly be digested extremely quickly, just as the knowledge it could give her would be much more significant. Since in that sequence, he wouldn't have to wait for Serena to pray, but could directly whisper what he wanted to teach. So, it was better to just have the ingredients for the next potion once she had digested it completely. Bored, he called on his familiar beach chair and sat down. Tap tap tap. His finger moved up and down the armrest in a slow rhythm, his scarlet eyes staring at nothing in particular as he thought about what he had to do now. I already have the characteristics of Listener. I'm just missing the secondary ingredients to have everything I need ready for her promotion. I can get those at Miss L's party so it won't be difficult. Not to mention that I already have my soldiers back, they'll get the ingredients for me. All I need to do is prepare the ingredients for Shadow Ascetic. Let's see. Sequence 7 Shadow Ascetic. The main ingredients were the shadow remnants of a Forsaken, while the supplementary ingredients were 10 milliliters of holy water, 3 drops of the blood of a believing shepherd, 5 drops of one's own blood. According to the blasphemy card, the blood of the believing shepherd refers to Sequence 5 of the path, shepherd. So if I want Serena to advance, I need to get the blood of one. Well, he doubted that it would be difficult or troublesome to get it. Miss L herself had said that if he needed anything, he could ask her, and she would not hesitate to give it to him. Of course, although her attitude towards him was friendly, it was very likely that she would ask for something in return. But the redhead wasn't worried about that either. The shadow remains of a Forsaken. Adrian murmured softly. He had already had that ingredient for a long time. Remembering the monster he once faced when he was still a provoker. That monster that looked like a cheap copy of a Resident Evil boss and moved in the shadows, Adrian couldn't help but sigh a little. The burnt band is an artifact born of a Forsaken. So it should serve as the main ingredient for the potion. His lips tightened a little. If there was an artifact that he had grown fond of, it was undoubtedly that armband. Not only was it the artifact that had been with him the longest, but it was also much more helpful. After being exposed to the Hanged Man's card of blasphemy, the armband underwent a change that, while not increasing its power, made it extremely convenient. He could now store objects inside the burnt band, just as the bandana itself could hide in his shadow if he so wished. This made it practically undetectable as it would hide in any part of his body that cast a shadow. Although hiding in its shadow meant that he would always hear the ravings of the true creator, the level of these was so low from what Adrian had already suffered that he didn't even notice. They never increased in volume, unlike when placed on his forearm, so it was just a matter of ignoring them. By far, the burnt band was his most useful artifact. Followed by hangover time. If possible, he didn't want to be separated from it. Of course, that was without counting on the fact that the artifact had been touched by the true creator. So Adrian didn't feel comfortable with Serena eating it. Ruling out using his beloved bandana, the redhead soon found a solution to the ingredient. After all, he knew someone who lived in a forsaken place. Smiling a little to one side, Adrian laughed amusedly. I'll have to ask little son to get me the remains of Forsaken Shadow. Given where he is, it shouldn't be difficult. Not to mention that he now has a powerful sealed artifact with him and it shouldn't take him long to advance to Light Supplicant, so it won't be a problem for little son to achieve it. Sighing slightly, he turned to one side, and with a mental command, one of the fire soldiers approached him. This one was of a similar size to him, only slightly shorter and slimmer. Calmly, the redhead pointed to the floating flame representing Serena. Your job from now on will be to pay attention to this flame. Every time it flickers, I want you to give it exactly what it asks for. I'll leave a little bit of information with you so it won't be a problem, just make sure you act as I've been acting when you respond. With the control he gained over the city, he could now share his knowledge with one of his soldiers. Adrian was sure that this was only a small part of the skills he would have once he became a war bishop. Sequence 3 of the Red Priest pathway could unleash the full force of an army and facilitate communication. Transmitting information to his soldiers could be a small glimpse of what he could do with that skill. Although doing this left him with a decent headache, it would ensure that he wouldn't have to keep going up to answer Serena's voice messages. The soldier said nothing, he just stood at full height and saluted. Nodding, Adrian extended his left hand and grabbed the fire soldier's head. Closing his eyes, he focused on the information he wanted to share with Serena and what she might possibly ask. Mystical languages, acting methods, Beander laws, knowledge of rituals, about her path and interchangeable and the sequence in which they could be interchanged, the odd secret of considerable importance such as the War of the Four Emperors. That information took out more than half of his spirituality. The flame that formed the soldier's head pulsed orange before slightly darkening. Releasing the head, which was now burning a soft, escalating red, Adrian sighed a little wearily. If it's an emergency or Serena has a question you can't answer, let me know. The fire soldier gave another excited military salute towards him and focused all his attention on the solitary flame. Adrian watched this and let out a soundless sigh. While he could have given Serena another path, like the warrior for example, that was something he couldn't afford. Although, thanks to Little Sun, he could obtain the formulas and materials relatively easily, he doubted that Serena could realize the potential of that path. The problem of her illiteracy would remain. Something that was much more urgent to solve than her strength, something she would acquire as she climbed the sequences of the secret supplicant pathway. If she had taken the warrior path, some things would have been easier, but the most important and serious ones would not have been solved, they would still be a huge problem. There was one thing she couldn't afford in this world, and that was illiteracy, even more so now that she was following him. Not knowing the most basic of basics would cost her life sooner rather than later. Besides, having someone to spread his religion is always welcome. The name Shepherd already gives me an idea of how well she will be able to gather believers, Adrian laughed softly. However, deep down, there was a somewhat childish reason that, although it had not affected his choice at all when deciding which pathway Serena would take, he found it very funny just to think about it. After all, the monarch's dark night has a nice ring to it. With all his work done, the redhead closed his eyes and let himself fall back into his body, leaving the city of calamities behind him. Opening his eyes back in his room, Adrian stretched a little before getting out of bed, putting on a simple t-shirt, and going to the kitchen. It was now 9 o'clock in the evening, dinner time, so it was his turn to cook. As always had. It's been a while since I cooked gnocchi. Shuffling through his mental recipe book, the dark-haired man rolled up his sleeves and began to stretch the fingers of his left hand. As he passed through the living room, the man gave a short greeting to Flora, who was lying on the sofa reading a book. In front of her was a plate of strawberry snacks and a bowl of melted chocolate. You were already taking your time. Jacob blabbed without looking up, popping a chocolate-covered strawberry into her mouth. Flora reached out her hand to take another one, but all she felt was the cold texture of the wood. Dinner won't be long now. I don't want you to fill up on snacks. You can continue eating them later. Adrian replied expressionlessly, the plate of strawberries and chocolate floating to his hand through his strings. The white-haired woman made a frustrated fist but could only sigh in exasperation. Fine. But it better be good. Those strawberries were fresh. Placing the strawberries on the counter, the black-haired man raised an inquisitive eyebrow at the woman. When did I make a meal that didn't make you clean your plate? The kitchen and living room were structured in such a way that they were connected and one could easily see what the other was doing. Flora smiled and closed her eyes, extremely pleased. Never. And it better stay that way. I demand to be pampered. Adrian could only scratch his forehead with a sigh. Could one even spoil an old person? Suddenly, the woman's gray eyes opened and looked at him deeply. You thought something about my age, didn't you? Bored, the dark-haired man took a pot out of a cabinet. Do you want your gnocchi with red or pink sauce? Red. Extra garlic. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Saturday morning, September 15th, Harvey Wayne's office. Barbarian Vivian smiled at her boss as she placed two different and thick stacks of papers on his desk. It had taken a few days without sleep and contacting some annoying old acquaintances, but she had managed to complete the mission rather quickly. Punching the group on the right, she added proudly. Here are the best mechanics I could find. If anyone can make that projector you want, it's them. Her hand moved to the next one. The other one is about several musicians who are in need of work. Their job profiles and experience, along with the instruments they play. Moving a little closer, she whispered, and when I say, in need, I mean desperate. When these guys heard I was looking for musicians, they came running with their resumes. Finding the mechanics had undoubtedly been the most annoying part, and it took her the longest. Almost all this time was spent looking for only the best. When she put up the sign that she was looking for musicians, 30 suitors knocked on her office door. In 5 hours, she had a list of more than 100 participants. Harvey Wayne grabbed the first page of the mechanics and looked at it calmly. He read a little of the profile, and after a few seconds, he put the sheet down with a small smile on his face. I'll have someone review their profiles. Good job, Vivian. Without trying to hide it, the barbarian smiled with pride. 1 point scored. A few more and I'll be able to ask. Calming down a little, she gave a slight bow. Is there anything else you need my help with, Mr. Wayne? Not until we finish reviewing everyone on this list. Harvey said with a sigh. You're free until then. Hiding her disappointment, Vivian could only bow and then leave the office. How long do you think it will take to check on each one with your soldiers? Flora asked calmly. She knew full well that whenever the man mentioned someone, he almost always referred to his soldiers. Whatever it was that kept them busy was finally over, and they were back. Now grabbing one of the group of musicians, the dark-haired man said half-heartedly, about 3 days at the most. 4 if something gets complicated. But by next week, I'll be able to get them to start working. Once again, the spy pigeons would come into play. Oh, how he missed that. Nodding a little bored, Flora took a deck of cards out of her sleeve. Want to play a game? It'll be 12 soon, so why not waste a little time? Saturdays were a bit slow, so they had little to do during the day. Yeah, why not? Rolling his shoulders, the dark-haired man carefully pushed the documents aside. Without saying anything else, with just a smile, the woman placed the cards face down in long rows, but not before showing them. This wasn't a game of poker, it was something much more childish and considerably more entertaining. The card game they were about to play was quite simple. Once the cards were laid out, whoever drew the most cards in identical pairs won. Placing the last card, Flora rested her cheek on her palm and looked at the cards with little interest. Tomorrow is the 16th, she said boredly. Adrian nodded at her words. He picked up a card and saw that it was a cup. He grabbed its pair. I've already booked the tickets for the trip, and I have some good motels in mind for the night. Although to a stranger, this would sound like they had planned a passionate outing, for the duo, the message was clear. Tomorrow was the Hermits of Fate gathering. A gathering that would not only change their future but could also bring them trouble if they weren't careful. Same room. Flora said as she held up a card and grabbed her partner's. Tomorrow's Sunday, isn't it? Adrian winked, answering with another question. Her fingers twitched a little, but the woman only snorted with false indignation. You're hopeless. What time does the train leave? Tomorrow at noon. Pausing before grabbing her card, the woman looked somewhat taken aback at the man, but after a few seconds, that turned to suspicion. Why do you want to stay another day in the Oldia district? She thought they would leave today, attend the Hermits of Fate meeting tomorrow, and leave the same night. However, they would only leave tomorrow and stay the night. I just want to see what the oldest place in the country has to offer, Adrian shrugged nonchalantly. After looking at his card, he went for the match. There's nothing more to it. He added. Gently tapping her cheek, the woman narrowed her eyes a little more. I don't buy it. Faced with the evident mistrust, the dark-haired man sighed tiredly. You want the truth? Such a question made her pause. The dozens of possibilities of what might come from his mouth froze her a little. What kind of stupid thing, evil event, disaster, or something random would come out of that guy's mouth if she said yes? After considering it for a moment, she gave a slight nod. Yes, I do. She thought that if it were one of the last two events, the man would let her know without making such a fuss or a spectacle. So it was much more likely that it was to annoy her. Adrian smiled brightly, his eyes shining strangely. Do you seriously think I'm going to waste an opportunity to sleep with you? My little piece of heaven. The hand that was about to grab the last card of her pair froze and closed into a mighty fist. The tips of her ears turned slightly red. I don't even know why I'm asking. Giving up, the woman grabbed her last pair and placed it on her pile. If I were someone more savage, I'd grab this chair and throw it in your face. Flora began calmly. Tell me, what's that new nickname? What? I'm not a worm or a rat anymore. I thought it was obvious. He raised his hand and delicately grabbed the woman's ponytail, who only looked at him with a raised eyebrow. Your hair looks like a cloud, and you're my wife. Isn't it the most appropriate? Adrian laughed in a low, amused voice, his hand playing a little with the ponytail. Flora's eyes flickered for a moment before she closed them and snorted to one side, her ears turning a little redder. Are you sure you don't have an Intesian side? That's something I'd expect one of them to say, not a fixation. Ha! No dear. Pure fixation here. Faced with the comparison, he shook his head without interest. Besides, those horndogs wouldn't know how to appreciate you like I do. Not wanting to delve deeper into the subject and give the man more ammunition, Flora just closed her eyes and sighed. Her victory in the game earlier completely forgotten. So, using the best move she knew to change the subject, she opened her gray eyes and looked deeply at the man. What are you cooking today? Being a cryptologist, noticing certain things about people was not beyond her. And since she spent a lot of time with the man, she could read him quite well. If there was anything that Adrian Kenway loved as much as annoying her or the people he considered close to him, it was cooking. Of course, not to mention coffee. The man's disinterested eyes immediately focused, his pupils centering on her. Oh, Milanese with mashed potatoes. Or would you prefer it with cream noodles? Immediately, Flora could feel her stomach grow somewhat empty. I've had enough noodles this week. Mashed potatoes it is. Would you like a little sauce on top? Do you really have to ask? Later that Saturday, in the night. With a full stomach, Flora changed into a simple white dress after her shower, and after fixing her white hair a little, she left her room. As soon as she did that, she sighed tremblingly and grabbed her sides. The nights really were cold here. Wearing simple slippers, she walked rather quickly through the dark corridors of her apartment to her companion's room. Knock knock. Come in. Barely getting the go-ahead and not wanting to be in the cold much longer, Flora quickly opened the door and entered the room. Faced with the temperature change, a relaxed sigh escaped her lips. Looking at her partner, she saw that he was in his true appearance. Unlike usual, his long red hair fell freely over his right shoulder. His back was against the frame of his bed, his scarlet eyes calm at his handiwork. He was wearing a shirt that was a little tight, so much so that he had to leave several buttons undone so that his chest wouldn't burst out of it, along with what appeared to be black trousers. The curtains were closed, and a solitary fireball floated next to his head, illuminating the pages of the book he was reading. That book was a small paperback book. The cover was an old yellow color with multiple worn parts. On the cover was a drawing of a boy riding a dragon. The drawing was crude but still understandable. She recognized the book as one of the 2 artifacts the man had grabbed from the list the church gave him. 2 to 65 Fanapotter's children's stories. This was the second time she had seen him since he had obtained it that day. How about the stories? Are they as childish as the book says? More or less. I don't know much about the Fanapotter stories, but they are quite childish, always referring to motherhood and returning to the earth. The redhead took his eyes off the book and looked at her for a moment. Smiling, he lifted the thick blanket in an invitation to come in. Faced with the offer of something warmer, Flora walked to the bed. Without delay, she got under the blanket and covered herself, a satisfied sigh leaving her lips at the warmth that now surrounded her. Just your style then. Maybe now you'll have other good stories to tell your kittens. She murmured wearily and closed her eyes. Quote. Adrian said nothing, just looked at her coldly. She lay a little away from him, leaving a little space between them. Puffing indignantly, the redhead closed the children's book and placed it beside his bedside table. He didn't have to read it again until 12 hours had passed, so he didn't have to worry about it taking a stroll through people's dreams and making them stupid. Therefore, he had 12 hours before he had to throw it back into the closet of calamities. With more than half a day at his disposal to do what he wanted, his first action was obvious. Both arms wrapped around the white-haired woman's waist, and he pulled her towards him, pressing her deeply against his body. Flora let out a moan of annoyance, but it turned into one of comfort. Her comfortable pillow had been replaced by 2 soft, extremely warm pieces of heaven. But, not wanting to let out too much of her happiness, she could only grunt with annoyance. You really are a cuttlebug. Although she said it with irritation, she made no move to free herself. She even turned around to fit better in the arms that enveloped her. The redhead chuckled and rubbed his cheek against her head. It's your fault for being so huggable. Now shut up and go to sleep. Tomorrow, we have a long day that I can already see will be annoying. About that, you're right. Flora murmured in agreement, crushing her cheek against her pillow. With everything they had to do tomorrow, she was sure a headache would be the least of her problems. So, with every intention of enjoying her own piece of heaven, she wrapped her arms around the man's sizable little waist and pressed her face into his chest. All the cold she felt died in the warmth that enveloped her, and within a few seconds, she fell deeply asleep. Foo-foo. Laughing silently at his favorite worm, the redhead closed his eyes and also fell asleep after a few seconds. Sunday, September 16th. After a long and peaceful night, the duo finally left the bed when the sun was already quite high in the sky. After a simple but filling late breakfast, Adrian and Flora left their apartment and went to the train station for their trip. By 7:40 p.m., they were already in a room at one of the motels that Adrian had found. Of course, they had arrived after spending the whole afternoon walking around the town. The room was quite large, with a bed large enough for at least 2 people to get in and sleep comfortably. The window at the side gave a beautiful view of Lumia Forest and a little of the village where they were. People wearing thick coats calmly passed through the streets, doing their shopping or a little sightseeing in the few hours of daylight. The hermits of fate would meet in the 16th village of the Oldia district, Borhem village. Adrian was now looking at himself in the bathroom mirror of the room where he was staying with Flora. Since he would be dealing with Beyonders, who would mostly be from the Marauder pathway, he had to make some preparations to deal with them. The first and most important was to change his face. But this time he was finding it a bit difficult to decide on a new appearance. It could be said that he would be meeting his wife's family for the first time, so he couldn't help thinking that it should be special somehow. For obvious reasons, he couldn't enter using his true appearance. Given the kind of people attending that meeting and Flora's warning, it was obvious that they would blow the whistle to claim the reward on his head as soon as they saw him. He could not enter under the guise of Harvey Wayne. Although it was only a matter of time before some members would associate Flora's companion with that identity, since the woman was always with him and did not change her appearance, he preferred to keep it hidden a little longer. After about 2 minutes of considering whether to use the face of some other well-known actor, a face suddenly jumped into his mind. For a second, his grip on the sink tightened, then he calmed down. Sigh. Why not? Adrian murmured a little, and with observant eyes, he began to change his appearance. Worms seemed to move under his skin, his face slowly changing. His skin paled a little, turning a healthy milky pink. His black hair, combed back, became looser and curlier. His black eyes turned dark brown, no longer sharp but softer. His cheeks became a little puffier, and a somewhat groomed beard covered his chin. His height dropped a few centimeters to 1.85. His waist bulged a little, and his chest grew a little, not the same size as his true appearance, but bigger than Harvey Wayne's. Smiling at this so familiar stranger, he winked knowingly. The other, he, repeated the gesture mischievously. A nostalgic sigh escaped his lips. Long time no see, Joa. This was what he looked like before he stopped fighting and before the accident. Before he let himself go and gained more than 30 kilograms. Of course, that was in terms of his features. He decided to keep the scars that remained after the accident. The sight of them became so common that he couldn't see his face without them. He looked down at his left forearm and saw the numerous scars that covered it. Although they were noticeable, none stood out more than the vast white line that ran from his wrist almost to his bicep. It did not look like a self-inflicted wound but rather a wound left behind after a significant surgery. His fingers on his right hand traced the line slowly. He ignored the 2 tattoos above it and focused only on that oh-so-familiar line. They had to rebuild my radius and ulna practically from scratch. My arms took most of the impact when I crashed, which, while it saved my life, meant that what was left afterward wasn't pretty. Hey, they had to join them with titanium. Honestly, he was pretty grateful to have been unconscious for most of the time while they repaired him. According to Cruyff, who was the only one who told him a little about his condition after the accident, his arms looked more like pieces of meat that a pit bull had bitten off. The only reason he didn't lose them was a long combination of a miracle, the fact that he was wearing a seatbelt, and the best doctors he could afford. Not wanting to remember those painful months in the hospital, Adrian just sighed and lowered his hands. His eyes went to his right arm and the cracks that covered it, an unfunny joke coming out of him. Even now, I can't help but break myself. Well, at least I can say that this scar is not one that I am ashamed of. Shaking his head, the dark-haired man adjusted the sleeve of his tunic so that the skin was not visible. With his new appearance completed, he finally emerged from the bathroom. When he came out of his makeup room, the first thing he noticed was his partner. She was wearing an elegant purple dress and a thin black bandana that showed off her forehead. Hiss, not bad. Purple is definitely your color. Adrian nodded in appreciation. Save your praise for someone who cares. Princess. Flora was about to say something else, but her words died in her mouth when she saw who was coming out of the bathroom. Her gray eyes shone in confusion. She had seen how he changed his appearance when the need arose. Although the faces were quite decent and helped to hide his identity, none had been as well thought out as this one. The scar, together with the soft brown eyes. The slightly curly hair and the beard with red details. Some of the features seemed to be Loans, but she could see traces of people from the South Continent. She could feel how that face had a particular meaning for the man, a rather deep one. Maybe a friend from the orphanage where he grew up. It must have been someone close. Shaking her head internally, she sighed softly and walked over to her partner. Is everything ready? Adrian murmured in agreement. Then we can leave now. In one fluid motion, Flora raised her right hand, and between her fingers was the silver coin. Without another word, Adrian extended his left arm. The tattoos on it shone gold and particles of the same color separated from it. 2 figures began forming from the golden particles before the duo. After a few seconds, an exact copy of Harvey Wayne and his guard, Abigail Rhodes, stood before them. Stay and act like us. Don't leave the room. Adrian ordered. Yes, sir. Both soldiers saluted and, with calm steps, went to the bed and lay down on it. In front of the originals, the soldiers embraced and fell sound asleep. Quote. Pressing his lips together, the dark-haired man turned his head slightly to his side. Flora was looking at him sideways, one eyebrow raised in judgment. I didn't tell them to do that, Adrian whispered, but he couldn't help the corners of his lips turning up in amusement. That the first thing his soldiers did as soon as he told them to act like them was to lie down and sleep together was something he hadn't expected, but now that he thought about it a little it made a lot of sense. Sure, it's not like they can do anything else at this hour. Maybe if it were earlier, they would go for a walk along the Lumia Forest Trail or spend some time in the town center eating the food here. But at the time it is, the only thing they can do to act like us is to sleep together. Flora seemed to come to the same conclusion as him, and the white-haired woman could only let out a soundless sigh. Let's just go already, shall we? Not seeing the point in upsetting his wife anymore, Adrian just rolled his eyes amusedly and took a small paperback book out of his tunic, an old yellow color. Faina Potter's Children's Stories. With a turn of his wrist, he opened the book. His spirituality flowed, and the yellowed pages of the children's storybook began to glow a soft, light blue. With the grace of a true gentleman, the dark-haired man elegantly bowed to the woman and extended his hand as a dance invitation. Rolling her eyes even more with a smile, Flora grabbed the edges of her purple dress and took his hand as etiquette dictated. With their hands touching, their bodies became illusory and disappeared from the room, leaping into the farthest dream. Reappearing in the mind world, Adrian took a moment to look around. When he manipulated Opera's dream using Flora's dream stealer ability, he wasn't able to see much of the landscape as he had entered directly into the woman's island of consciousness. This was the first time he could really see the mind world. A vast and infinite gray sea was under the island of consciousness they were on. This gray sea was made up of countless water droplets, each representing a different subconscious. This was the sea of the collective subconscious. It looks like a giant brain. Adrian couldn't help comparing as he looked at the dozens and dozens of islands of consciousness surrounding the one they were now on. Each one seemed to give shape to and contribute to the breathing of this inconceivable brain. His gaze shifted from the strange sea around him to his body. Something new had appeared besides his clothes. An illusory tunic bordering on reality and illusion completely covered his body. Besides, what are you doing here, Hunter's Hallow? He showed no reaction as soon as he noticed that the tunic had manifested itself incompletely. He just looked sideways at his partner who was holding his hand. Flora looked around bored, her gray eyes passing from one island of consciousness to another. She didn't seem to notice the robe, and he had no reason to believe she was intentionally ignoring it. She couldn't see Hunter's Hallow. Adrian didn't react, so with his partner's hand in his, he stepped into another dream. Now, he stood at the edge of a person's dream bubble, a light mist separating it from the rest. As he walked through the dreams, he tried to make sense of it. The robe has only manifested itself in extreme situations or when someone has tried to touch something it was protecting. Not counting what happened on Moonless Night. There has only been one other time when Hunter's Hallow acted directly. He could still remember how after his confrontation with Kilongos and the machinery hivemind and Nighthawk's ambush. A member of the former had tried to use an artifact against him, but the robe reacted. Given everything he knew about the world and himself, it was very likely that Hunter's Hallow actions were a form of protection for others and himself. They were using the ability of a dreamwalker to travel between dreams. Their physical bodies and spirit bodies became incorporeal, and they could travel between people's dreams. Considering the state of my soul, it's no surprise that it manifests slightly. Of course, it could also be so that my mind doesn't interact with anything. After all, that thing is the elephant's foot. Sighing slightly and with 2 to 65 in hand, Adrian and Flora jumped through several dreams until the woman said that was enough. 1. Leaving the dream journey, the duo found themselves in the deepest parts of the town. This way, Flora didn't even look at him and walked purposefully to the right, her gray eyes looking at the silver coin in her palm. The dark-haired man followed her in silence, giving himself a moment to look at himself. Seeing that the illusory tunic was gone, Adrian closed the yellowed covered book and put it in his pocket. They walked for a short 5 minutes through the dark alleys of the town before Flora stopped in front of an unremarkable wall. Adrian looked around curiously. What would the entrance to the meeting be like? Flora calmly raised her hand. The silver coin in her right hand shone a little before she placed it between her fingers and threw it towards the wall. Click. Instead of falling to the ground as it should have, the coin stuck to the wall like a magnet. The moment the coin made contact with the stone, the symbol of fate and concealment looked them in the face. The wall itself also seemed to change in some way. The old rocks that formed part of its body seemed to be flickering, some changing places with others and others coming out of their places completely, as if suddenly they didn't quite fit. The best way Adrian could describe it was as if the wall had suddenly suffered a texture error. The white-haired woman turned slightly and looked at him serenely. I will be the one to speak. Don't say anything unless you want to buy or are looking for something. Mistrust will be the least of our problems when we enter. As it was rare for his dear worm to be so serious, the dark-haired man gave a slight nod in understanding. The most he would try to find at this gathering would be the ingredients for Jerry's potion, along with maybe a few pages from the Emperor's diary. Although he knew that the Jacob family had been one of the 5 angel families to support the reign of the Mad Blood Emperor during the Tudor Empire, Adrian doubted that they had any Red Priest pathway formula that would interest him due to the status of the families in the organization. Of course, that didn't mean he wasn't going to ask. A conspirator must always be looking for information after all. Who knows? If they at least have the complete iron-blooded knight formula, it would save me a lot of trouble and time. Smiling calmly at his companion, Adrian said, I'll be a good boy. Flora just looked at him for a moment in silence, her gaze flat. After about 5 seconds, she shook her head with the same expression, I bet you will. Turning her attention back to the strange wall, she added, stay close. Adrian laughed softly but said nothing more. He stood next to his partner. With her, they both took a step and went through the wall. The first thing the conspirator noticed was how everything seemed to twist and stretch. The silver coin remained unperturbed, always in the same place and giving off a slight sparkle. Suddenly, that sparkle pulsed, and an illusory wave covered his entire vision. He felt it pass through his whole body like a cold, ghostly breeze. The sensation only lasted a moment, disappearing as quickly as it had come. Clink. The coin detached itself from the now brick wall and flew back to Flora, who calmly caught it midair. Closing her fist and the coin disappearing, the white-haired woman smiled calmly at him, welcome to the hermits of fate. Adrian looked around curiously. I wasn't expecting this. They were now in a large room that looked like something out of a fantasy book. A large fireplace stood in the middle of the wall, its soft but warm orange flames illuminating their room. Several high-quality sofas, bookcases, and tables display various fruits. The room is adorned with a thin but highly delicate purple carpet with crimson details. A large door made of what appeared to be oak wood was at the end of the room, where it led was unknown. This was the room one would think a princess in a world of magic would have. Extremely old but with a remarkable class about it. Adrian looked deeply at his companion, the clothes she chose to wear, and her beauty. The corners of her lips were slightly raised in a small smile, without breaking the cheek, a smile worthy of nobility. Quote. He just looked at her, making the smile on his companion's face grow a little wider. Finally, after 15 seconds, Adrian broke the silence. Quote. You're not a Jacob's princess, are you? Because I wouldn't have imagined there was such a perverted princess. The woman's smile tightened, and one of her eyelids flickered momentarily. We only became dukes at our highest point, so there was never an opportunity for one to exist. Flora replied calmly. Seeing that he had elicited a reaction, Adrian laughed softly and looked around. Is this your private room? Being one of only 3 demigods among the Jacob and Zoroast families, Adrian could tell that it came with certain benefits. A private room was the least of them. In part. Flora nodded. I was given this place once I was promoted to parasite. She raised one hand elegantly as if she were presenting the whole place. This room is part of the last remaining pride of the Jacob family, as well as the only reason why the hermits of fate still exist. After pausing for a few seconds, she said, with deep emotion in her eyes, this place is the legacy left by our ancestor before he died at his hands. The Castle Jacob. A castle straight out of the 4th epic. Looking around, the dark-haired man whistled in appreciation. To remain standing to this day shows how special it is. It would not have helped the Jacob family if it were merely a regular castle. They would have been eaten long ago if that were the case, so it had to have some unique feature. From the feeling of stretching when they went through the door, they had most certainly traveled to another place, but where? Flora nodded. It's a special place, but not in the sense you think. In reality, where we are now is a reflection of what the castle Jacob was like during the Fourth Epoch. The castle no longer exists. It was destroyed during the War of the Four Emperors, but its reflection still exists in the mirror world. Using the mirror world specialty, we make this place impossible to access unless you have a pass. Using the most dangerous jungle in the universe while ensuring that he doesn't come across it here by accident doesn't mean he can't steal one of the passes, Adrian remarked calmly with one hand on his hip, his eyes looking around with much more interest. So this is the mirror world. I didn't even notice. It's no lie that it's a reflection of reality. Although they had already dealt with the fact that finding this place was extremely dangerous and challenging, that didn't solve the Raven's best skill, looking for cracks to sneak through. Flora smiled knowingly, exactly. But the coins don't just work as an entry. They're a trick. Using so many methods unique to the Marauder pathway, like deciphering the key, is more like decoration with no functionality. Of course, you can see them as valuable distractions that take time. All it takes is 2 seconds for the check to be completed. The white-haired woman's smile grew a little. The objective of that is simple, to check the fate of the person who wants to enter the castle. If it detects the slightest change in their fate, the entrance will be cut off, and the would-be entrant will be thrown into the mirror world, where they could end up anywhere on the planet. We achieved this thanks to the only grade 0 artifact we still have in combination with another one of grade 1. Thanks to the combination of these two, we managed to protect the castle for so long. Laughing softly, Flora sighed soundlessly. I'll explain it better once we enter the stronger control zone. I doubt you know what I'm referring to. I think I have an idea. Adrian tapped his chin with one hand, a somewhat reflective expression on his face. Do you? With eyes slightly open, Flora tilted her head slightly. Adrian nodded. I'm leaning towards two possibilities. The first is the grade 0 artifact, which is made of the characteristics of a Trojan horse of destiny, while the grade 1 artifact is made of the characteristics of a secret sorcerer. The grade 0 artifact detects the change in destiny. And the grade 1 artifact is the one in charge of expelling the target. The second is almost the same, only the grade 0 artifact is made from a soothsayer's characteristics. Something that can see destiny much better and detect change more easily. The grade 1 artifact remains the same. It's simple but quite useful. He said honestly. Adrian had thought that initially stealing someone's destiny was a perfect change that no one would notice, but it turns out that even the Raven's theft leaves visible traces. Of course, the only way to see them is by using Angel's abilities, which are also related to destiny. Adrian added in his heart before sighing slightly. That pathway was scary, no doubt about it. Lowering his hand while shaking his head slightly, the man smiled sweetly, did I get any right? Quote. Flora blinked owlishly a couple of times. She knew the guy had a deep knowledge of all the pathways, but she didn't think it was to this extent. By having a general idea of what the artifacts did, he had identified precisely which pathway they belonged to, not only that but also their sequence. He also seemed to know much more about the Marauder pathway than she thought. Well, at least that explains why every time I tried to steal, based on his knowledge, the theft never failed. Saying in her heart, the woman sighed. It's the first option, Jacob murmured dazedly. I don't know which pathway the soothsayer is. Ah, looks like I got it right. Laughing softly, Adrian winked mischievously. Soothsayer is sequence 2 of the monster pathway, by the way. Flora, after a few moments, could only huff ungraciously and roll her eyes. Shaking her head slightly, the white-haired woman walked over to the fire and, grabbing something from the shelf above it, she threw it at the red-haired man. Put this on. That will signal that you're with me, and no one will ask any questions. Catching it effortlessly, the dark-haired man raised an eyebrow and opened his palm. His words died in his mouth when he saw what it was. It was a ring made of what appeared to be gold. It had fine details, a small gem in the middle, and a symbol drawn on it. The symbol was a hand with 5 fingers. The ring finger and little finger are curled up, while the other 3 fingers are naturally spread out, symbolizing the hour hand, minute hand, and second hand. Adrian could recognize it as the coat of arms of the Jacob family. Unable to help it, the man laughed incredulously and looked at his partner with extreme pleasure. Wow, Flora. Usually it's the man who gives the ring, but I'm not complaining. It's beautiful, it feels good to be spoiled once in a while. Jacob's expression trembled and she rolled her eyes exaggeratedly. Just put the ring on and let's go, we've already wasted enough time. Foo-foo, yeah. Don't rush. Laughing a little more, he walked over to the woman's side and placed the ring on his left ring finger. As he had expected, the ring grew and adjusted to his finger, fitting him perfectly. Don't you think it looks divine? Like a woman who had just been proposed, he opened his palm and showed off the ring to his partner, even placing a hand on his waist. You're hopeless. Flora tried to hide it by adjusting her cloudy hair a little, but it was harder to hide the red tips of her ears. She had already expected the man to do that, but it didn't mean she wasn't surprised. Looking at the guy's brilliant smile and flashing eyes, she refused to go along with it and elegantly turned away. Come on, the meeting shouldn't be long now. The Jacob said, her face serene. Like I said, don't wander off on me. I'll be in your care. No longer playing along, Adrian took his hand and silently followed the woman. The two then crossed the oak door, leaving the room and making their way to the meeting. Adrian took the opportunity to look around. He didn't try it, his eyes moved from one side to the other, revealing his interest. This was the first time in both of his lives that he had been inside a real castle, so he would be lying if he said he wasn't excited. For obvious reasons, Saphira Castle didn't count. While it had the name, that Sephiroth failed in appearance. Putting aside his criticism of the home of the poor god, the dark-haired man returned to his work. The corridor was huge. Chicho could appear and walk along it with both arms outstretched to the sides, still not touching the ceiling or the walls. The corridors, like the previous room, were just as extravagant with delicate, beautiful purple carpets with crimson details covering the entire floor. Several times already, shields bearing the Jacob family coat of arms had passed by. Torches lit up the corridors every 3 or 4 columns. Every 4 meters, there were huge windows that once undoubtedly offered a fantastic view of the outside and that at some point illuminated these corridors more. Now the white curtains were closed. We are in the reflection of a castle from the 4th epoch in the mirror world. Although the castle is complete, who knows what it looks like outside. Furthermore, even in a reflection, a window can still be a door through which something can enter this place from another point in the mirror world if not covered. Reviewing what he knew about this mysterious dimension, thanks to the book he got from the tower, he could only sigh a little. Finally, after a considerable time of walking without seeming to advance, Flora stopped in front of a large dark oak door. Above it was a large shield of golden metal, which, like the rest, bore a symbol, but it was not that of the Jacob family. It was a crown with a naturally flowing cape attached beneath it. Surrounding the crown were 5 symbols. To the left of the crown, a layer of doors, drawn using simple lines. To the right, a disc with a surface divided into 12 segments was visible. However, the segments weren't evenly distributed across the disc. They were of varying sizes and extremely incongruous. Furthermore, each grid had half of its surface covered in a shadow. There was a black needle, just like a clock from the outside world. Below the crown are 3 additional symbols, arranged from left to right, is a vertical eye made from many small and thin patterns, the coat of arms of the Jacob family, and the last coats of arms consisted of thorns, a shield wall, and vertical swords. From what Adrian remembered, that was the coat of arms of the angel families that supported the Tudor Empire. In order, they were the Abraham, Ammon, Antigonus, Jacob, and Tamara families. Adrian could see that the Ammon family's coat of arms, although recognizable, was quite damaged. It was as if someone had taken a knife and scratched and cut the coat of arms with force to get rid of it but failed. After what that raven put them through, it's no surprise. Also, this is a reflection, so changing things inside is extremely difficult. The dark-haired man shook his head internally before turning his attention to his partner, who had stepped forward. The white-haired woman raised her hand where the silver coin was and, placing it between her fingers, she threw it again. Clink. The large door vibrated for a moment before the illusory symbol of the Jacob family appeared. Another similar wave covered them again and the symbol disappeared after shining gold. Flora turned her head slightly, looking at him sideways for a moment. Don't do anything stupid, her gaze seemed to say. The corners of his lips trembled slightly, wanting to rise in innocent mischief but holding back. Adrian only nodded slightly. Whether she understood what he meant or believed him, the woman did not show it, she just turned her attention back to the front and placed her hand on the doorknob. Creak. The large dark oak door opened easily, and along with it, the sound of voices reached their ears, but these diminished in volume as the door opened. With pure grace, Flora entered, and not wanting to be left behind, Adrian followed her calmly, always 2 steps behind. He took a moment and looked around with some amazement. They had just entered a large hall. The magnificent chandeliers together with the intricate murals and windows showed that galas and dances were undoubtedly organized here. But while that was the past, its use was somewhat different now. Several tables were distributed around the hall. The vast majority had a centerpiece, which was the coats of arms of the Jacob family or the Zoroast family. The latter's coat of arms consisted of an old clock tower. The tables with the Zoroast family coat of arms had the most members, followed by the Jacob family, and finally, those without a centerpiece had the fewest. A large podium stood in the middle of the room, where 2 people, a man and a woman, were sitting on dark red sofas that bordered on blood. The man was sitting elegantly but with a certain strange air. He appeared to be in his late 40s, his hair was dark gray, and he had an elegant mustache. He was wearing a blue suit with a purple belt scarf. In the breast pocket of the suit was embroidered the coat of arms of the Zoroast family. On the other hand, the woman sat with great confidence, her legs crossed and her cheeks resting on her knuckles. Her straight black hair was cut above her shoulders. She wore a thick black dress with gold details and a witch's hat, the light gray ribbon in the middle of the hat embroidered with the coats of arms of the Jacob family. They seemed to be talking to each other, but when they saw them enter, they fell silent. Although their eyes passed over him, it was only for a few seconds before they focused entirely on his companion. The tables with family members looked at Flora in amazement. The tables with nothing on them looked at her, mostly confused, but some still seemed to recognize her and did not seem to believe what they saw. After a few seconds of observing, the man on the podium gave a slight nod. Welcome back, Madam Flora. It's been a while. Flora nodded back just as eagerly. Sorry I'm late, Mr. Andre. I've been busy. Snort. Busy, you say. The woman scoffed with great derision, her blue eyes shining with great merriment. 10 years without seeing each other, and that's all you say. Flora's calm expression remained. Hello Fiorella. Andre watched their interaction for a moment and, sighing slightly, he held out his hand to one side. You can come closer if you like, Madam Flora, it's a pleasure to see you well. In a moment, a chair will be brought for. It's okay. I'll take one of the free tables. Flora said no more and did as she said. Adrian followed her closely, watching from the corner of his eye. Neither Andre nor Fiorella seemed to react to his companion's actions, but he could see that the smile on the woman's face trembled for a moment. They must be the other 2 demigods Flora was talking about. Could they be on the same path? The woman looks like a parasite, but I'm not sure about the man. Parasite or mentor of deceit. With the poor state of the families, Adrian wasn't sure if they were in any condition to give birth to a sequence 3 saint, so it was more likely that Andre was a parasite. If he activated his spiritual vision, he would be sure by seeing his aura, but he wouldn't do something that stupid. Also, I guess I finally know who Flora was talking about meeting again. He looked calmly at the woman named Fiorella, already disliking her. Sitting at one of the free tables on the Jacob family side, Flora placed her hands in her lap and looked at the duo with cold eyes. We need to talk later. Oh. Fiorella smiled curiously. Did you discover something interesting over the years? Come on, tell us, Flora. What have you been doing all this time? Did you find our legendary treasure? Or did you finally give up those stupid fantasy dreams and didn't want to come back because you were ashamed? Flora looked at the woman with black hair, closing one eye. She sighed and looked away with disinterest. You'll have to wait then, this is something the heads have to talk about. Fiorella's smile turned into a silent, "Oh," as she looked at Andre. The man shook his head gently, and the woman clicked her tongue in annoyance. Adrian looked sideways at his partner, trying to see if what the woman had said had reached her, but Flora was the epitome of calm, her breathing was relaxed and easy. Feeling his gaze, the white-haired woman opened one gray eye and looked at him. After 2 seconds she winked and quickly closed it. Smiling at the woman, the dark-haired man looked around and saw that no one had said anything. He decided to take the first step. Getting up, he looked at the duo on the podium. "I can just ask for what I need, can't I?" Fiorella looked at him bored while Andre nodded. "That's right. Just say your order, and if we have it, we can make a deal. Once a deal is reached, just extend payment, and the exchange will be completed." The smile on Adrian's face grew a little, and he raised his left hand, making sure to show the ring on his finger. "I'm looking for the formula for iron-blooded night, the rainbow salamander's complete pituitary gland, 10 milliliters of a Farsman rabbit's spinal fluid, and pages from the diary of Emperor Russell. Is there anyone who has them or knows where to get them? I can pay for them or give something of equal value in exchange." Adrian looked around with little interest. As this was a meeting where most members were part of the Marauder's pathway, it would be stupid and a waste of time to hide that he knew it was a diary. "We have several pages in stock." A man from the Jacob family side replied, "It's 20 pages. 100 sasam for them." "Deal." Smiling slightly, Adrian reached into his tunic and, counting the bills with his fingertips, withdrew the exact amount. Extending it into the air, he watched curiously to see what was supposed to happen. Before he could react, the bills in his hand were exchanged for yellowed pages. The new texture on these indicated that they were copies. A sealed artifact. The change had been so quick and natural that he doubted he had missed what had happened. Deciding to ask his wife what happened later, Adrian boredly counted the pages and saw that they were all hidden in his pocket. No sooner had he put the pages in than another voice from the Jacob family group spoke. "We also have the 2 ingredients you were looking for. For both of them, it will be 1800 sasam or 600 pounds. Although Adrian had been a little surprised before, he was now alert. The deal seemed to be moving from objects of lesser value to greater ones. Not only that, but no one else had said anything since he made his request. This fact confirmed his original thought that an artifact was at play, making these deals possible. But it also aroused his curiosity immensely. An artifact made of the Justiciar pathway. It's possible, maybe there's a law here that makes the deals completed here fair and without cheating, but why is it from lowest to highest? Putting his thoughts aside for a moment, the dark-haired man recounted the amount ordered and spread it before him. As before, the yellow bills disappeared from his hands, and now he held 2 metal containers. After verifying that the materials and contents were correct, Adrian also put these containers away. Unable to prevent a little emotion from coursing through his blood, the dark-haired man waited a few seconds for someone to speak, but no one said anything after a while. Of course. It can never be that easy. Swallowing his sip of disappointment rum, Adrian sat down again.